On today's special edition Memorial Day podcast, we are going to thank each and every one of you military veterans for putting the time, honor, and diligence into this country. We appreciate all that you have done, that we can even have this podcast. And we'd also like to welcome again Dean Lambert from the Love Always Project to this podcast.
And as a trigger warning, we are going to be discussing the topic of suicide. So please listen in.
Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about grief and mourning. Is it argumental or existential? What's it mean to be? Let's talk about death.
Hi, I'm Benny Capal, and I'm a funeral professional.
And I'm Nicholas Capal, a psychologist.
Hey, Nick, let's talk about death.
Let's do it.
Welcome back, listeners. We got a special Memorial Day presentation for you.
Let those flags, let them go in the wind.
Let them fly, baby.
Let 'em fly.
Let them fly. When I say presentation, it's only for the ears, but I hope you can see us in your mind's eye. With us today, we have back again by popular demand, Mr. Dean Lambert.
So, Dean, your family is a lot of veterans, correct? You come from a family of a lot of veterans.
Yes, I am sort of the black sheep that I was discouraged from joining the military. I couldn't run laps in football, and I might have had a problem with
Basic
not
training.
discipline. Yeah, but no, well, that for
Authority.
sure. Authority. There we go. Yeah. So, but my father was in Vietnam a couple of years, and now he writes books about. Well, all kinds of wars, actually, World War II and Vietnam and stuff. And then my brother was a Navy SEAL, and my son was a Marine. And before he's my ex-son-in-law, my son-in-law was also a Marine. So I've been surrounded by veterans my whole life, and so what I do to contribute back is ride with the Patriot Guard riders and donate to worthy causes like the Wounded Warrior Foundation and others. So.
Hats off to you for doing all that. That's
Thank you.
They're giving up their lives and their time, and that's super important. And I think we all should, moment of silence, maybe.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and I also want to give out a shout out to both my grandparents and Doc Nix too, Edward Tyson and William Capal, because they were both veterans too, who served. And we wouldn't be able to have podcasts like this or have conversations like this if it wasn't for those men and women who put their lives on the line for us to do this. And to be completely frank, this today and this whole holiday isn't just about grilling and wearing your American flag shirts. There was a lot of families who are out there who are struggling from loss of a loved one or PTSD from actually being a part of their military service and seeing and hearing things. And I just really want to say that we hear you. Nick and I are both civilians, and Dean too is a civilian. So we don't know what you're going through, but I will say that you are being seen, and we really do care and respect our veterans. So thank you, all veterans out there living and who have died before this podcast. So thank you so much. So Dean, let's talk a little bit about your family. So you wrote this blog, and I think you really bring up how important this day is, this holiday. Can you kind of get into that? Maybe how it started for you when you were younger to now?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Well, growing up, I spent the first 18 years of my life moving around 17 times from military base to military base. And so I grew up, going through the gates and showing my ID and, every single day, seeing what our military does, at least on the home front. And, I would take the bus from football practice or baseball practice to base and wait for my dad, who would drive me home, or my mom. And, usually at 5:00 on a lot of military bases, they lower the flags, they play taps at the end of the day. And, if you're in your car, you stop your car, you get out of your car and you salute wherever the flag is, towards the flag. And so I grew up with all of that. I got into scouting, which is also, sort of very patriotic and was a sort of a young military organization way back when. And so, I just grew up around it. And so I always had this sort of innate understanding. My dad was gone for a couple of years when I was younger, when he was in Vietnam. He got there right when the Tet Offensive was happening. I mean, he landed and, I think it was the next night or whatever. And, the one thing I remember is whether my father was stationed at home or whether he was somewhere else. And by the way, he actually he's 82 years old, and he is still working as a public affairs contractor at an Air Force base right now. I mean, he's the oldest public affairs officer, so to speak, rated in terms of civilian rating in the country right now. So he's still doing that stuff, but it just was sort of innate in me. So this Memorial Day blog was extra special because we had actually lost our son, and my son growing up, I don't know how he got it, but he absorbed from me, maybe us, riding Harleys and stuff and going places where there's a lot of patriots, people who fly the flag. But about a mile from our house, they built a Iowa Veterans Cemetery. And we always, no matter where we were, when we rode, we went through the cemetery. He loved it there, and it is a very beautiful place. So that 8 years before he died, we were there right when the cemetery opened or was getting ready to open. And then, of course, the Memorial Day after his death, it was pretty weird because I have pictures of him, sort of looking at this one area where he just happens to be buried, literally looking right, maybe a few degrees off from where his actual grave is today. So it's pretty wild to go through that as a family member, and that's something I'd like to cover later on about what the family members go through as well, because you can't understand what your veteran has gone through, no matter how they tell you, how much detail. But hearing it and being shocked by it, and then knowing that it was as bad as your worst nightmares. When they were telling you that it's okay, we're doing fine, and then coming back and seeing the effects of PTSD, that really it's tough for families. So
I can't imagine. First of all, Dean, no father should ever have to bury his son or his daughter, or mothers should bury their children. So I want you to know that my condolences for you, and I know Doc Nick feels the same way. But that's kind of how it is, right? That they go off, they do their service, and that's life. And so it's a struggle when they come back.
Yeah, it is.
And I'm not, like I said, I don't know how that is. But I can only imagine the things that they see. Me as a funeral professional, I see a lot of stuff, and I take it to heart, and I take it home as much as we're supposed to not. But I can't imagine seeing that or doing that, and also bullets flying above or to the side of me and worrying about my own life. I can't imagine. And yet again, it just makes me so humbled to be able to thank all military personnel. And, I got to be honest, when you do go to military cemeteries, they are incredible. The way that they're taken care of, the way that everything is on a time. That's one thing Dad and I, Dad taught me very young he's like, hey, if we ever go to Mount Holly, which is our local cemetery, he's like, realize there's a time you have to be there, and there's a time you have to let the family know that's what it's going to be. But that's so beautiful, right?
Yeah, every 2 hours.
Yeah. It's just this idea that, like, now, with the way society is, it's kind of like, okay, there's a time, but that's kind of up in the air, right? You can kind of mosey on in, people will wait for you. Like, we got to do this. This is because it's honor, right? And I think it's beautiful. I've had the opportunity to watch plenty of burials, and it's class. And that's something I think we've lost a little bit of in today's society. And that's one thing that I love whenever I deal with a very military funeral, is just how classy it is, how much honor and loyalty are given into those and care, right? And I think it's beautiful. I also had the opportunity of taking care of with my dad. I was very young. I actually wasn't licensed at the time, but remembering dad taking care of a fallen soldier and having the soldier come and stay at the funeral home and make sure
Mhm.
everything was done. And I was just like, man, this is so beautiful how the extra care that the military gives to their personnel is just, it's incredible. And like I said, as a funeral director, I am always in awe when it comes to how the military take care of their own.
Yeah,
It
I think it's all about decorum and
Mhm.
honor, like you said, and you're absolutely right. I think that that is missing in all aspects of funeral service. You know, these days with people not understanding that the reason why the military does things from training to everything else is because they know that human beings, despite what you're hearing in the media today, we're all the same, you know. And yes, we have culture and we come from different places and we have different life experiences, but the military knows that people react certain ways to certain kinds of things, and so that's the leverage they have in training, but also that's the thing that they do in honoring no person left behind. You know, I mean, they always go and get their injured and dead. That's one thing. And you know, you might think that's a military thing, but it's a human thing. And people think that the military has is a lack of humanity, and trust me, it has its problems. You know, especially as it gets more integrated with different people with different life experiences. You know, from gender to the different kinds of attitudes towards gender and harassment and things like that. And that all makes the media. But the fact of the matter is, if you talk to any veteran, they'll tell you, or anybody who's in the military today, that there's no color. Yeah, the genders are still kind of separate, and that's because there's rules to separate them. But the fact of the matter is that all of that goes away. You said bullets flying. They're able and trained to detach. It's the training that allows them to do it. It's like when a pitcher's on the mound. This is a really bad analogy, though, but they're able to shut the crowd noise off, and it's because they've trained themselves to do that, and that's what the military does. But the main thing is that the reason why they have the processes and the procedures in the burial is because it's the last processes and procedures they have that sums up everything that a military person was trained to do, and that is to have honor, that is to focus on success, victory, that is to leave no one behind, and that is to be humane. You know, and aren't those really cool values to have just in the world?
It's interesting you brought up the pitchers because I don't think a lot of people know this. There is actually sports psychologists, right? And their job is to basically assess what is the best pitcher to play that night, who
Hmm.
is the best capable that night. That's what these high psychologists are getting paid, right?
From weather to the
Yep.
team who's batting and playing
Or
to
life, right? So they're
life.
they're literally looking at anxiety and depression and all that stuff, and
Sure.
they're saying, "Oh, this is the person you want to play," right? Especially if we're talking like, if we're getting to like the final 7 games, or you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like they literally pay people crazy amounts of money to do that. And on top of that, think of the military, right? The military has been psychologically trained in how do we get everybody to be on the same time? How do we get
Right.
everybody to do what needs to be done, right?
Mhm.
And then I think that's a beautiful thing. It's just I don't think people give enough respect or enough honor to these people because they literally are being trained to do things that none of us want to do,
And
right?
that changes them forever. And
Absolutely.
some people are able to take that and leverage it when they're out of the military. It's not that they don't have some form of struggle, but others respond, better than others. A lot of officers and some enlisted people had associate's degrees or went to college and had a life experience before the military, and so they may be able to adjust when they get out of the military. But for people like my son, I think the military. I would never disparage the military, but I think there's a lot of people in the military today who are responsible for taking care of people who are now not in the military. They either retired or their term was up, and they realize that it's really they still haven't gotten to where they're able to take care of everybody from a standpoint of they're going to have the PTSD issues and things like that. But when all you've done is military from 18 years old for 8 years or whatever it is, it's hard to acclimate and get yourself off that skip of a record. If some of the listeners remember what records are, but it's just something that basically does not let the needle go forward. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of veterans, especially ones that struggle when they get back, and ones that consider or actually, take their lives. Those are the people that I think that I don't know if you can save them all, but I know that the military would agree that they're not doing as good of a job as helping them get back into the world and figure out, okay, what can I do? I
Right.
hated what I did in the military, so I need something different. Or I loved what I did in the military and I want to keep doing it. Or whatever, you know.
Well,
Um,
let's do some statistics here. Let's do some. I
yeah.
guess this might be mind blowing for a lot of people. So in 2001, the VA started actually collecting data on how many veterans are dying of suicide, right? And in 2001, they came up with the number 5,989 vets died that year from suicide. Let's skip up to the last year that they came out with data, which is 2019. They had 6,261. So that number is going up,
Mhm.
right? So, and if you look at other numbers, right? So they're saying like in the Vietnam vets, right? 15% of the Vietnam vets committed suicide. 15%. That's a lot, right?
Right.
They're saying with Iraq, it's anywhere between 11 and 20%. Right now, the number that they're kind of saying is 13.5, right? That is super high. And we all know, right, in the last, from the Vietnam to Iraq war, psychology has gotten a lot better, right? Where mental health is actually became something that people are okay talking about now, right?
Right.
Some, let's just put some, right? So again, and the other problem is right, what is the big problems here? We're talking about PTSD. But what
Right.
the other thing, the other alarming number that I came up with is that there is a comorbidity rate between PTSD and major depression disorder of 52%.
Wow.
So if you think about this, right, that's a lot of red flags going up for me as a clinician, right, as a psychologist. Like, okay, so we're not just dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, we're also dealing with major depression.
Yeah.
So if they're
Because they can't
super
get their lives jump started, right? Or their
right,
relationship is goofy or whatever, it's not the way it was.
Well, let's throw a national pandemic in this mix too, right? So
Mhm.
they're coming home to now even more being isolated into their own societies because of a pandemic. There's extra fear talking about this too, which we all
Sure.
know what fear leads to. So these numbers are going to go up, right? So it's the same conversation we talked about with the Love Always project with death, right? We need to talk about this. We need to start coming up with some solutions to help these veterans because the, the the education is out there, but we need to put it together, right? We need to find a way to be able to help. And I think this conversation right here is so fitting to Memorial Day, right? We want to memorialize them. We want to keep them in our hearts for what they do and what they give up to do. And Doc Nick, when you say those numbers, it's astronomical. And these are our
It's
soldiers.
staggering because of how much more we know about things, and I think that the rates for veteran suicide are still alarmingly high. And maybe the only reason they're going to go down is because we're not involved in a major conflict right now. And that's a good thing on two counts. But you would think that there's just so much more information that it would automatically bring it down. But I think you mentioned the word pandemic. Well, it's not quite the pandemic, but I'm convinced that Adam had permission to do what he did because a month before he died, a very good friend of his who he went to boot camp with died by suicide. And a month before that, it was somebody else that he knew. And a month after Adam died, another Marine killed himself, and he was a way up there. I mean, I think he was a gunnery sergeant. He had 4 children. He was in his mid 40s, and the reason he killed himself was because he missed some messages while he was deployed from one of his former charges. Okay. And wanted to talk to him. And when he came back in country, it was a couple of weeks after that young man killed himself. And he was so distraught that he wasn't able to help this person who he'd fought with, that he couldn't take it when he came home. Now, there were probably other extraneous circumstances, but what I'm saying is it's a domino effect. Adam, and here's the other thing. Psychologically, I would love to hear what you think about this. But when you see those things on Facebook, till Valhalla, man, I mean, they're lauded and revered they're almost not quite martyred, but you see these um, celebratory almost comments on Facebook and these adulations of the person who died. And so if somebody's considering suicide and they see that, they don't understand that they're not going to be around to see those tributes to make them feel better than they feel now. They don't understand how final it is. But when they see those things on Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is, I think it sort of emboldens a young person or any person, because it's almost an honorable way out. And I think that it is a bit of a epidemic because, it's one begets another. That's just my opinion. I mean, there were
No,
before Adam, there were 3 before him and at least one after him, just in his small circle of influence.
I completely agree with you. I think that suicide in some areas is fantasized. And I also think the other thing that I always tend to go back to is there's been so many people that have chosen, suicide off the Golden Gate Bridge, right, in California. And one of the things that I think there's been 7 survivors. I think something like that. 7 have survived it. All of them, all 7 that have survived it, said the same thing. The minute that I let go, I immediately regretted my decision.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest problem, and especially when we're talking about suicidality, right? And this is in my clinical realm. It's a very impulsive decision, right? It's a very, I'm not going to say knee-jerk reaction, but the problem is that they've gone through so much pain, so much torment, that in their mind's eye, the only solution they have is to end it.
Yeah, I do
But
think
if you can stop that thought,
mm-hmm.
and you can just 5 minutes, 5-minute conversation, I guarantee you we would save most of them.
Well, let me tell you the story of how it kind of worked out with our son. He planned this thing like a military operation. Okay. We went out on July 4th and we had a great time. Obviously he didn't like the fireworks and things. So we walked around downtown and, he was funny as always. And finally, when we got home, we were all sitting around watching movies and he seemed he seemed very relaxed, and we were watching an Adam Sandler movie, and Adam's big thing was he knew the dialogue to every comedy movie. And I think I told you guys on the last time I appeared, we had Gaffigan and a bunch of comedy guys coming over the speakers and mixed in with his favorite songs. And you could see people smiling as they walked in because they knew, they could hear Adam saying all the stuff that we were, sort of putting through the speakers. But anyway, so I was sort of getting annoyed because he was, saying all the dialogue, and I was tired. I'm old. And so I said, all right, I'm out of here. And I kind of slapped him on the knee, a good natured way. And I said, good night, see you later. And he said, good night, Dad. I love you. And in hindsight, he didn't ever say that. In hindsight, that was a goodbye, because I wish I would have turned around to look at him, because if I saw him, I might have seen like something would have triggered me that okay, all right, that's okay, I'm gonna stay up. But anyway, we went to bed, and he had snuck out of the house probably about 4 or 5 in the morning. He put his BDUs on, which is his the camouflage stuff. He had a note in his pocket and some photos, and he had written in his journal a note to each of us. And I don't know when he did this stuff. It could have been that night. It could have been 2 nights before that. But I do know that he was working in a sporting goods store, and he tried to buy a shotgun, and he didn't pass the quick check, the NCI's check, and so he couldn't get the shotgun from there. And he actually went to another sporting goods store, and he bought a black powder rifle, because you can buy those. You can buy them through catalogs, right? They're not considered as dangerous because it's one shot. There's not a magazine. Anyway, and a black powder rifle. Okay, so think about this, guys. I'm purposefully being a little bit graphic here, because on one hand, you'd think it was impulsive. You hear about all the guys who take their service pistol, and they got it's the bourbon next to them, and they're reading a letter, or they're just crying or whatever, and they pick up the pistol and boom, right? I mean, that's sort of the way everybody pictures it. Okay. But so he went through all this. Now he, when we found him, he was laying down, and he had his chain with his dog tags wrapped around his hand. I mean, he was laying down almost like he was in a casket already, guys. Both hands were by his side. And you're thinking, how in the heck could he have loaded the black powder rifle? Okay, I don't know if you guys ever shot a black powder rifle, but it's not like, you've got to load the powder, you've got to stuff the powder down, you've got to put the sabot in there, or the round, whatever that is, and you stuff that in. You've got to cock it. It's a rifle. You've got to position it. I mean, picture all of the stuff he had to go through to be very deliberate in ending his life. And I agree with you that until you let go of the bridge, it's not really real. But you still let go, right? You have to get to the bridge. Adam had to go through this whole thing, and he was stopped along the way, right? Nope, can't have a shotgun. And thank goodness I have, a safe full of things. And unfortunately, the first thing I said when I found him and the sheriff came up and told me, back off, it's a crime scene. The first thing I said to the sheriff was, that's not one of mine. That was the first thing. Because I grew up, never wanting to get in trouble, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, if he shot himself, I was thinking, think about this from a psychologist. We could talk about this later, because there's a lot of analysis you could do, Doc. When I was more worried about him having killed himself with one of my guns, meaning I left one of my guns accessible in a house where we knew there was a kid with PTSD. I was worried about me, which everybody around me will tell you that's the way it is. But my point is that he had to go through a real drawn out process. He had to get in those BDUs, and his sleeves were folded exactly the way you're supposed to. His boots were bloused, so was it an impulse? What can you say about a person that premeditated, and what signs can you look for? Was it the "I love you, Dad," that I should have stopped in my tracks and said, that ain't right? That's not right. He's too calm, And so that's the thing I think a lot of families struggle with, whether it appears to have been an impulse or whether it appears to be something that was very planned out. And trust me, dudes, I beat myself up about that all the time. And in my worst moments, you go way, way back and figure, what did I do? I mean, we now know that he joined the military to die. In his diary, he wrote that.
What you're speaking about right now is a normal feeling. So let me put it out there first.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very human experience, right?
Sure.
We, as people that love someone, survivors of suicide, right? That's what I call it. The people that are left behind, right? And wondering, what did I do, right? Human experience with grief in general is to try to put blame, right? It's to try to blame something. Because if we can blame something, then we don't actually have to deal with our grief. It's a distraction, right? And then on top of it, to piggyback off that, another thing is like, even if it was your gun, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hindsight is 2020, meaning that you are blaming yourself for knowledge that you did not have at that moment.
Oh yeah, you're looking for something to blame yourself, even if he was a perfect kid up until that. And I think many people say that their religion or their culture is a guilt-ridden one, but we all have guilt.
Absolutely.
We all have guilt. So I don't beat myself up every day about it, but there'll be moments where you think about it. So I would say that there's probably a lot more people out there who have difficulty dealing with that, and it makes the loss even harder. And I think a lot of times, I go to the Memorial Day celebration they have. The governor comes and other dignitaries and things like that. And part of the reason I go there is like I'm a Jewish guy, so we celebrate Yom Kippur. We don't go to confession. Yom Kippur is the day that all Jews everywhere atone for your own sins and the sins of all Jews everywhere. That's a lot of pressure, but we do it on one day after fasting, right? Get it done in one day.
Yeah,
But
that's
the thing about it is, I believe that I go to the cemetery, especially on Memorial Day, as a bit. It's not only a celebration, but it's also a bit of penance. I feel good on many levels for going. Not the least of which is that his day of burial was it's surprisingly amazing because we had a surprise visitor. Governor Rick Perry from Texas was running for president at the time. I had done a motorcycle ride event the year before that Adam was supposed to come with me on, and he couldn't because he was working. So I was on a mailing list, and I got called to come to this event that the Governor Perry was speaking at a couple days before Adam was interred. And I said, I can't go. And honestly, here's what happened, And they said, oh my gosh, well, if you feel like coming, that's great, because actually the governor's going to be talking about PTSD. So I was mowing my lawn and there were people in the house and stuff. I said to myself, I got to get out of here. I think I'm going to go to that thing. And Governor Perry came up to me. Somebody must have told him who I was. And, he's a veteran, and he lives in Texas where my dad lives. And he was in the Air Force like my dad was. And so we got into this really personal conversation. And he said, I would really love to come to the Veteran Cemetery when you bury your son. There would be no press. I'll just come with my traveling secretary. And I would be honored if you would allow me to do that. I said, well, I mean, it's free country. It's a public cemetery. Fine. He ended up beating us there. And some of my relatives were there, and my wife's family, and he was talking to every single one of them, shaking their hands, hugging some of them. And he showed up there. And so, there were all these blessings. I've got a thing on my wall back here. Our congressman who lives in our town actually was voting on a bill. And after they voted, every voting congressman was able to say 60 seconds of what they wanted to say on any subject. He did a eulogy for my son. Apparently, Adam had met him several times at the American Legion down there. I never knew that. And so on C-SPAN, I got a call from from the secretary. He said, turn C-SPAN on and watch your congressman vote on a bill. And he said, trust me, you'll want to see this. It's kind of like on TikTok where they say, wait for it, wait for it.
right.
So I'm like, all right. I got my phone out and I started recording, and he did this 60-second eulogy, and they flew a flag over the Capitol. So what I'm saying is that not everybody can celebrate every year, the day they buried their father, son, brother, sister, mother, who was a veteran. And I find it's very fortunate that it worked out that way for me. And I think about people who might not have that. And when they go to the cemetery, it's very, very hard, especially how that person died. One of the Patriot Guard rides I went on was a young guy. I wrote about him in the blog. He graduated early specifically to join the Marines, went to Afghanistan. I think he was in Afghanistan, wrestling champion of a small town. And 3 months after getting in country, he got hit by a sniper. He had just turned 19. So his parents go and they have a completely different experience. What's their guilt? What can they celebrate? What do they think about when they go to the Memorial Day celebration or every Veterans Day? And the other thing is, Adam's birthday is May 30th. So
Yeah.
then you start thinking about, you know, was he supposed to go in the Marines? And I mean, he was born on Memorial Day, Memorial Day right around weekend, and you're like, how did this all work out this way for me? So, in honor of Memorial Day and in honor of all the veterans, it's just a special, special day to remember people, um, even if they lived a long, full life and died. Most of those veterans, especially World War II veterans or even Vietnam veterans, they were either overseas for 4 years and didn't see their families in case of World War II, or they were in country in Vietnam for 1 year, which was probably 2 years of World War II fighting because it was so horrendous there. And those were the best and the worst times of their life. You think that you win the state championship in high school and that defines you for the rest of your life? These people spent 4 years or 1 year or 2 years um, as a whole other person doing something that nobody back home would imagine and that you don't want to talk about and tell people when you do get home, right? They'll
Well,
never understand.
and I think the beauty, the weird, beautiful part is that where it gets hard is that then they come home, they made it, right? They're
Yeah.
alive. But how do I come home to this?
Not only that, but
We talked about guilt and shame, right?
Mhm.
All that stuff that they saw, or what you know, we talk about guilt and shame as if life changing events, right? But like they really did have life
Right.
changing events, and they're
Well, and you
thinking
think
of
about
hindsight 2022, right? What if I would have jumped on the grenade? What if I would have? You know what I mean? Like all that,
absolutely on and on.
all
But
that stuff
remember,
is going through their head. So
yeah, and the time that they were gone, however long it was, for them is they come back thinking everything is frozen in time, that their town's going to be the same, their dad's going to look the same, and their mom's going to look the same, and their siblings are going to look the same. No, life went on while you were away. And guess what? They were living life as normal, and you were living life that was the most messed up thing that anybody could ever see, depending on what you did. So they come home and people have moved on, they've gone to college, maybe a girlfriend has moved on or whatever, or god forbid your spouse gets in a relationship. That stuff happens, and so you're like, what the heck happened? I was only gone for a whole year, or 4 years. And so think about how I could not imagine coming back thinking that life will be the same, even though in your mind things have changed. But you know, I mean, that's why that's the thing I appreciate most about veterans, especially ones who are deployed or go on multiple deployments. Because no matter how many times you go in country, when you come back, um, you think things are frozen in time. Bills have to get paid. Yeah, your wife's taking care of children, or or your husband's taking care of children. It is just mind-boggling to think of what that does. And the only thing I can say is that's why it's important to honor those folks. Don't
Oh,
forget, it's an all volunteer military.
no, and
Yeah.
especially you're talking about like your dad was part of the Vietnam, right? You said Vietnam War. So imagine now coming home and half the country is disgusted by you and is
Yeah.
not thanking you for your service. So not only are you coming home to a loss of 2 to 4 years of normal civilian life, but now you have a country that doesn't want you back for
Well,
some
especially
people.
what if you agree with that too?
Uh,
You've
it-
seen the things and you really wanted to get home because you didn't want to be a part of it. So you agree with all those people, yet you still were in the military, so you were part of it. And so you got to deal with that as well.
yeah,
Well, yeah, I know you feel bad, but you did it. What
it's
was-
it's absolutely it's ludicrous, but you're absolutely right. That's why we have this day. This is why it's important.
Mhm.
Whenever you see a veteran, I come from my father, who was the old school. You always think a veteran because you don't know what they've seen, what they've done, and that's just what you do.
Mhm.
And you see some people that don't. They have no respect for it, and it's very sad. I still
It
have
is, but
farm.
I don't get down on those people because look, it's still all voluntary, and there's far more people who don't have family members or haven't experienced that military life. They read about it and things like that. So, you know, I just I don't like it that people don't not because it's not patriotic, just because I know what the sacrifice is. Um, so, for me, I would rather somebody ask me questions about it so that I can tell them why I feel the way I do, and maybe they'll understand then. But too many people don't. I mean, again, the percentage of folks that have been in the military, especially been deployed, is still quite small, and so there's still a lot of folks that just don't understand the profundity of being a family that's waiting for somebody to come back, or being part of a family who somebody didn't come back, or they came back and they were so changed and then they're gone.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. Well, another thing too, as a professional in the funeral home, I'm shocked every time I hear a wife come in, or a husband of a veteran come in and say, "We don't want to have the military. We don't want to have the
honors.
services at the grave because they don't want it. That was something they did for their country. They don't think they should be honored by it." And I always think, like, oh my gosh, like they deserve every moment of that. But how humbling is that for them, not only, and that's what boggles my mind, right? Like they look at it for some of these, like, just, this is what I did for my country. I'm
Hmm.
glad to have done it, but that doesn't define me. And
Sure.
it is that's, yet again, thank you, military, everybody out there. And Dean, I really want to thank you for being vulnerable and telling us that story. I really
Well, I
appreciate
appreciate you
that.
letting me get it out. Yeah.
Because there is a lot of families and people out there that can relate to that situation. Um, and I think the best thing we can do is by honoring them, is by talking about them and
Hmm.
bringing it up and bring it to the foreground. So thank you, Dean, on that. And I want to thank your family for making this country how great it is. And we can have these discussions because of that, because of them.
No, we're very honored. We're very honored, and we certainly can't take any credit except for the fact that we have lots of folks in our family who served, and I think it makes us feel very good, and we also know we've got a extended family out there that of people who have similar experiences to us. So,
But but again, I think you guys should take credit for that, and also be take credit for being a parent of one. You know what I mean? Like
mhm.
it's an honor. It's an honor.
Sure, it
So, and
really
it's an
is.
honor having you on the show. You're always a bundle of joy.
Well, I appreciate it, guys. Hey, for some folks who may not know, we may want to get this in here. There are a lot of people that don't want to have military honors or be buried at a military cemetery, but folks should note that being having a veteran who passed, funeral directors can. There are veterans benefits that have nothing to do necessarily with honors and things like that. So I would encourage people that, even though you don't want to make your military career a big part of the celebration, especially if you've lived a long life beyond your career. There are still benefits for folks who were honorably discharged or generally discharged. So, I mean, I would encourage any family of a military person that they've got to plan a funeral for to ask what kinds of benefits there are, from financial to other things, and especially in a military cemetery, in a national or a state veteran cemetery. They will pay for the marker and the opening and closing, things like that. So you don't have to have the honors to still get some benefits that will help the family.
Absolutely, Dean. Thank you for that. Yeah, if you're out there and you have military, please talk to your funeral professional. They can guide you in any way you want, or your local VA will help you in any way that they can too. If anything else, the flag, is such a great representation of the time they gave for our country. So thank you, all veterans out there. Dean, I think we're going to end it here. Thank you for coming
Great.
on again. Thank you for bringing your story in, and yeah, your son. Thank you for his service, and all you veterans out there. I hope you have a wonderful day, and know that we are thinking about you, and that we love your service and the honor that you put into it. So thank you so much from all of us at Let's Talk About Death and Mr. Dean Lambert.
Thank you.
Thank you, veterans, and have a great Memorial Day. And like always, Doc Nick, if you're not talking about death,
You are not living. Thank you.